Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to neutrally unpack authors Yefeng's pretty radical proposition. We're talking about the idea that the traditional institutions of family and marriage are actually hindering human evolution. It's definitely a heavy concept, but we're going to dive right in and look strictly at what the source material presents and exactly how it constructs this argument.
So what if the people you love most are actually the biggest obstacle to your freedom? It's a totally paradigm-shifting question, right? I mean, we are so used to viewing our families and our spouses as our ultimate support systems. But what if those closest relationships are actually keeping us trapped in a state of arrested development? Let's take a closer look at how the text sets up this framework. All right, starting with Section 1, the trap of emotional dependence. Now, while leaning on family or a spouse might feel incredibly comforting in the moment, this philosophy views that comfort as a dangerous numbing agent. The core idea here is that emotional dependence actively hinders your personal growth. It's basically like a safety net that eventually turns into a web. The more you rely on these close emotional ties, the more your independent consciousness erodes, eventually reducing you to what the text bluntly describes as a parasitic state, completely unable to thrive on your own. Moving right along to Section 2, the language gets pretty intense. Families as hostage situations. The author actually writes that everyone, whether parents, children, husbands, or wives, is in a relationship of emotional hostage-taking. Just let that sink in. Within the traditional framework of a family, personal autonomy isn't nurtured. It's severely restricted. Imagine a reciprocal dynamic where you are literally holding each other hostage, where your independent thought and your day-to-day freedom are completely dictated by the emotional demands of the very people you live with. Let's break down the mechanics of how this hostage situation actually works. It's essentially an inverse relationship. On one hand, you have an incompetent family member, and the more incompetent they are, the more severely they take the rest of the household hostage just to survive. Then, on the flip side, you have a highly capable family member who remains completely oblivious to the incompetence they're actively enabling. Because they are so capable, they essentially mask the deficiencies of their dependents, creating this really vicious cycle of blindness and restriction. And this erosion of autonomy, it happens across all primary family roles. It isn't just a one-way street. Think about the standard household dynamic. Parents take their children hostage, children take their parents hostage, husbands take their wives hostage, and wives take their husbands hostage. It is a systematic, continuous stripping away of personal freedom that leaves absolutely no one truly independent. Everyone is just constantly managing everyone else's emotional state instead of actually evolving as individuals. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the parasite and the host. Taking this a step further, individuals in emotionally dependent relationships are compared directly to parasites. And think about it, parasites are entirely lacking in gratitude. Instead of appreciating the host, who acts as the main provider in the family, they just demand more. When that provider inevitably becomes drained or weak, the dependent party doesn't step up to help. They actually complain and condemn the host for lacking the energy or blood to keep providing. To back up this intense analogy, the text asks us to look at some real-world examples. It directly compares young adults who live off their parents indefinitely, the so-called NEET generation, to these very parasites. But then it completely flips the script. Parents who rely entirely on their children's support in old age, they are viewed through the exact same lens. Suddenly, traditional familial duty starts looking a lot like a biological survival strategy, doesn't it? Okay, zooming out a bit, let's look at Section 4. Seeking an advanced civilization. Looking at the big picture historical timeline, we see about 5 millennia of civilized existence, yet humanity is currently blocked from reaching the true pinnacle of civilization, an ultimate state referred to as the 1,000-year world in heaven. So what is the primary roadblock keeping us from crossing that finish line and achieving this utopia? Well, according to the source material, you guessed it, emotional dependence. Zufang boldly asks this question. In nearly 5,000 years of history, who has actually lived a continuous life of happiness, joy, freedom, and bliss? Just think about that. And the text don't answer? No one. No one has truly achieved a sustained state of bliss. Why? Because the very institutions of marriage and family stand directly in our way, anchoring us down with shared pain and mutual obligation. So, to reach this advanced state, the proposed solution is a society completely devoid of marriage and family programs. In this new model, individual burdens are carried solely by the individual. The pain of the parent stays with the parent, the pain of a spouse is borne completely alone. There's absolutely no spreading the misery around. By severing emotional dependence, everyone remains entirely independent, and therefore entirely free to reach their maximum potential. And this brings us to our final core concept. Section 5, the second home living model. Now, you might be thinking this is all just some philosophical fantasy, but the author points out that a living model called the second home, created by Life Shani Wan, actively puts this theory into practice. The claim is that by entirely eliminating traditional family structures, human suffering is greatly reduced. The premise here is remarkably simple. When everyone is strictly independent and utterly unburdened by familial duty, life actually becomes exceptionally beautiful and comfortable. To really lock in this radical perspective, the text utilizes a famous quote from Christ Jesus. It's used here to vividly reiterate the core thesis that those closest to us, literally the members of our own household, might genuinely be the very obstacles hindering our highest ideals and our ultimate freedom. They aren't enemies out of malice, but simply out of their structural role in keeping us bound to them. Which leaves us with a really profound provocation about the true cost of absolute independence. If the path to an advanced civilization truly requires severing all family ties and emotional dependencies, we have to ask ourselves, what is the true nature of our closest bonds? And are we willing to pay the price of walking completely alone to be truly free? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.